My name is Stuart Parsons. I live in Newark, Ohio, and I'd like to talk about my family and my family history. I'm hoping maybe I can give those who come behind me, Aiden and Beckham particularly, and those that come behind them, some background as to my childhood and my growing up and my adult life with Marcia, my wife. So here goes. Start with I'm married to Marcia Parsons, Marcia Graves Parsons. We were married August 12th, 1967. I've just retired from 38 years at Park National Bank about 2 years ago, and I'm enjoying retirement. Um, Marcia and I lived most of our married life in Newark, Ohio. We moved here in 1968 when I took a job with Park National Bank as a trust officer. We lived 817 Smithfield Drive, and about 7 years later we moved to 887 Sharon Circle. I believe that was 1975, and we lived there until 1998, and we moved to 1436 Estates Drive here in Newark. We have two children, two sons, Jay Edwin Parsons, born October 30, 1971, and Greg Stuart Parsons on October 31, 1973. Let me talk about my family somewhat. I grew up on a farm near Johnstown, about 3.5 miles west of Johnstown, a farm that my grandfather and my grandmother bought in 1910. We still have the family farm in our possession. It's about 137 acres. The farmhouse is still there, and the barn is still there, and some of the other barns. I was born in that farmhouse March 3, 1942, the youngest of three children. I have an older sister, Eleanor Jane Parsons, who was born March 22nd, 1937, and my brother Terry Wayne Parsons, was born on July 17, 1940. Terry and I were both born in that farmhouse. At that time, it was not customary for farm families, at least, to go to a hospital to have babies. You had them at home. I believe my sister Eleanor was born in a farmhouse about a mile away, a rented farmhouse that my step-grandmother owned. I think that's correct. I'll have to ask her that question herself. Interestingly, I think that my father was also born in that farmhouse, although I'm not sure about that, but I think he was. He was born November 13, 1914. His parents, Nelson Leroy Parsons, I think his name is, went by N.L. Parsons, apparently a lot of his life. He was born, I'm going to say, in 1874 and died in 1836. My grandmother, her name was Alta Stout Parsons. She and my grandfather, as I say, bought that farm in 1910. And up in the barn, you'll find apparently the place where Mr. Adams, the previous owner, put in paint the date 1910, when apparently the farm was sold. The barn is much older than the house. My dad always thought it must have been built in the mid-1800s, maybe around the Civil War, perhaps a little before, because it has hand-hewn beams. And if you go there today, you'll be interested to see that those hand-hewn beams are very visible, huge beams, and he always felt that made the barn a very old barn. My mother, as I say, Alta Stout Parsons, died very early in life when my dad was about 8 years old. I think in 1922. She died of cancer in that farmhouse. So my dad lost his mother at a very early age, and that was hard on him. From the stories he used to tell me, his father remarried some years later, a woman by the name of Leslie Fitzwater, who had a daughter, Doris Fitzwater. And my dad used to tell stories about it was not a very happy childhood for him. growing up on that hard life farm work with his dad, but also with a stepmother that was not particularly sympathetic apparently to him. He went to a one-room schoolhouse just down the road from the farm. I think it was called the Park Schoolhouse, which burned down in the mid-70s. I have a picture of it somewhere in my possession. But he spent the first probably 8 years of his education life in that one-room schoolhouse. Then he went to Johnstown High School, where he graduated in 1932. He worked very hard on the farm, and his dad didn't really support him very much on school activities, so he didn't participate too much until his last year of school. Then he played football, which he enjoyed very much. Played center for the Johnstown Johnnies football team. I don't believe his dad ever went to one of his games, from what he said, so that tells you not much support from his family. He's also in a school play, because I've seen that picture of him in that play. So he did have somewhat of a social life. He was a pretty backward young man, I believe. He wanted to go to college. He wanted to be a lawyer, but his dad would not let him go on to college, would not support him, and insisted that he stay on the farm and help him with the farm. So that dream never came to reality for my father, which is really a shame. He did stay on the farm. He married my mother, Menzie Chestor Barnhard, in May of 1936. And they eloped. My grandparent Parsons, Nelson Parsons, my grandfather, and his wife Leslie Parsons, did not apparently want Dad to leave the farm and get married, but he left without telling them and went off to Greenup, Kentucky with my mother and got married in 1936. And they came back. I think they rented the farmhouse over on the probably Duncan Plains Road. I think they lived in that farmhouse for a couple of years, maybe less. I think that's when my sister was born in March of 1937. And then my grandfather, Nelson, developed an ulcer of some kind and went to the hospital and did not survive that trip to the hospital in 1937 sometime. And so I think it was just after my sister Ellen was born. So at that point, his estate needed to be settled, and Dad, I think, was the executor and had to, in effect, buy the farm. Even the understanding he had was that had he stayed in the farm with his dad all those years after high school, that when his father passed away, that my father would receive the farm. He had 3 sisters, Doris, Helen, and Leela. So not only did he have to split the farm with them, but also under the law, because my grandfather left no will, at least they could not find one, that meant that she inherited 1/3 of the estate. So he had to buy the farm, 1/3 from Leslie and the other fraction, major interest from his sisters. And so that was quite a hardship on him and my mother. But they did, so they bought the farm. It was about 100 acres, I think it was. Sometime in the late 30s. He also bought some more acreage from Bill Ashbrook, I believe, towards Johnstown, right adjacent to the farm, to make the existing farm 137 acres. Our life on the farm was, as I remember growing up, being the youngest of 3 children, my memory is not quite as good as my brother and sister, but we had a very nice life, a nice, happy life. My mother and father worked very hard. We didn't have a lot of money at that time. Farming was hard work and didn't pay a great deal. But it was a great family life and a great independent lifestyle for farmers. And so I remember a number of things which we're going to talk about, hopefully with my brother and sister sometime, about the things they remember growing up on the farm. It was a hard life. My father milked cows, so he got up early in the morning every day and made his way to the barn, which is about 100 yards away from the house, and get the cows in, get them milked and before breakfast, and come down to breakfast. My mother would fix a big breakfast for all of us of eggs and bacon and or ham and all kinds of things that would make a great breakfast. And you worked hard, so he had to have a lot of good food to eat. And then he'd go out to the barns to work with the livestock. We had cows and sheep and hogs and chickens at that time. In my early life, this is sort of hard to believe, but we did not have a tractor. We had work horses. And I remember that very well. One of the first few things I remember, the first things I remember as a young person, was sitting on my mother's lap while she was driving a team of horses to a corn binder, which is essentially a piece of equipment to cut the corn and then lay it aside. Then my dad would come up and pull together a number of the corn stalks containing the corn into a bundle and tie them with another corn stalk to make shocks. And then you come back later on and take the shocks up to the barn and get the corn out of the stalks. I'm not sure what exactly happened then, but it was very hard work. But that was one of the first things I remember. I also remember sitting on her lap while she drove a team of horses to a hay loader, which was a piece of equipment to pick up hay off the field and run it over the top onto a wagon, and that was towed behind it. And he would be behind that, be on top of the wagon, taking the hay and with a fork and moving it to each part of the wagon so that it could be properly loaded. And then he would unhitch the team from the hay loader and put it up to the wagon. They would all drive to the barn, and from there he would hitch the team up to a long rope pulley, and my mother would drive the team of horses at his command. But before he did that, he had to back the wagon with the team of horses into the barn, and then hook up the team to the rope. Then he would get a big fork, about the size of maybe 3 feet by 18 inches or 2 feet, which I have in our garage, by the way. I would stick that fork into the hay, and then he'd signal my mother, and she would drive the team out across the barnyard to pull the pulley up into the barn, and then he'd trip that, so we'd slide across the barn into the mow. He'd trip it again, and drop the hay into the barn. And then he'd reverse that. The team would back up, and he'd have to do that time and time again to get the wagon unloaded. And then about every fourth or fifth row, you had to climb the ladder up into the mow and push the hay around to where you could get more hay up in the mow. Very hard work making hay, as well as any kind of farm activity. So he'd work in the field all day like that with my mother. And then about, 4 o'clock, she would go into the house and cook supper for us. Of course, she cooked a big lunch for us as well, and while she was fixing supper, then Dad would milk cows usually. And by the time he came in, he had a full day, obviously hard work, and we had a very big dinner. One of the things about living on the farm, we didn't have a lot of money, but we had lots of eggs, lots of milk, all the meat you wanted in terms of ham or bacon or pork chops. We had obviously chicken. We had lots of beef. We had wonderful beef steaks. We also ate tongue and brains. I remember that very clearly. I didn't like it, but we did have that occasionally. Had fried chicken. My dad would catch a chicken with a long wire cane-like piece of equipment, and chop the head off in the backyard. The chicken would flop around sometimes before it died. I guess it was probably dead anyway, but then he'd bring it to my mother, and she would take about a bucket of scalding hot water and dip that chicken into the water over and over again to make it easy to pluck the feathers off. And then she'd pluck the feathers off, and then take the kitchen in the house and cut it up, prepare for cooking. Pretty violent event as far as eating is concerned, but we did eat well. We made lots of homemade ice cream. We had lots of eggs, and the milk we got from the cows was not, of course, pasteurized or homogenized. So overnight, the cream would rise to the top of the milk in the bottle. So we had lots of cream. Dad had coffee with cream in his coffee. We had lots of cream to make for cooking and for making homemade ice cream. In the summertime, it was a great treat. So that was the kind of lifestyle we had. We did have a car, I remember. I think we had a 1936 Ford, the first car I remember. And it's pretty well beat up. I remember Dad buying a I think it was brand new, 1949 Ford. It may have been 1 year old. He did a couple times at least. He had a person that liked to buy a new car every year, and so he'd buy this man's used car, 1 year old car. And that 1949 may have been a year old, may have been used. We also bought a 1953 Ford from the same man, so I remember those cars very well. But anyway, the 53 Ford, I think, had automatic transmission, which was quite a treat at the time. We had a good life. We had a happy life. My father worked hard. He enjoyed his family. He played with his sons. My mother was a wonderful, pleasant person, very happy. She used to whistle a lot and sing songs to herself. She was an excellent baker and an excellent cook. She always made homemade donuts or pies and cakes, homemade bread, noodles. She was a wonderful cook and just a wonderful person too as well. As my sister, I remember my sister going off to school on the school bus, and I remember watching the school bus come and go with her, and I think that'd be great to ride the school bus someday. My brother was very athletic, and he was 3 years younger than my sister and 2 years older than I. So we had a lot of fun playing together, playing lots of games around the farm, mostly involving sports of some kind. A lot of baseball. He really liked baseball, so they played a lot of baseball. The two of us. We didn't have much in the way of TV. We didn't have a TV probably till 1950 or thereabouts, and there was only 3 channels to watch, and those were not good reception at that time. That was a treat to watch shows, but not a lot on during the day. And so if we wanted to entertain ourselves, we didn't have any kids around nearby, as you would if you were in the city. So we had to entertain ourselves or play with each other. And so my brother and I played a lot of baseball together, a lot of football. But mostly I remember basketball and baseball as being our 2 favorites. And consequently, we became pretty good at the game. I recall one game we had, we'd pitch tennis balls to each other, and I became a fairly good pitcher because I developed a curveball, somewhat of a knuckleball, and other pitches that made him a pretty good hitter. And he had much better size than I did, so he had a better athletic career than I did in school. And he went on to Denison and became an accomplished baseball player there. I think it's an all-conference player in baseball there at Denison from 1958 to 1962 when he graduated. He was also involved in basketball. He was on the team as a freshman, but he dropped out and concentrated in baseball. After that, he became an assistant coach as last year with Dick Scott, the head basketball coach. So he got some valuable coaching experience there, which helped him out later on in his life. My sister, being the only woman of the 3, we tended to tease her a great deal. Some things of which I'm not real proud of today. We used to do some tricks we used to play on her. We used to hide in her room, for example, and when she'd come in, we'd jump out behind furniture and scare her to death. Just silly things like that. One of my favorite stories, which I'm sure they'll have stories about me, but one of my favorite stories is one day, well, one of our jobs as children on the farm was to collect the eggs from the chickens. And that was a very unpleasant job to do because the chickens were smelly. It was always dusty in the hen house and noisy. And it was just not a very pleasant job. You had to reach under the chickens, and sometimes they'd peck the back of your hands when you went to get the eggs. So it was not a very pleasant job. Well, we used to take turns, and one day it was my sister's turn to gather the eggs. And so she started out grumbling about having with the basket, trying to make her way out to the chicken house. My brother, who was very ingenious about tricks and always had a way of talking me into things that I probably shouldn't have been talked into, he said, come on. And I said, what? He said, come on, play a little trick on sis. So he and I followed her out to the chicken house. She did not see us. And after she had gone into the chicken house, he reached over the outside latch and hooked it so that the door was now secured. She could not get out. And then he said, now start pounding on the wall. So we pounded on the side of the chicken house. This had two effects. Number one, made a lot of noise and it stirred up the dust somewhat. But also the chickens got excited and they started squawking and squealing. And this upset making lots of dust in the hen house. And this made my sister start screaming, which in turn caused the chickens to scream and squawk even more. And so she became very frightened and she goes tearing against the door to get out. And of course the door was locked and she could not get out. So then she was screaming even louder. So this was the kind of tricks we played on my poor sister. And I have to say, those are things I'm not real proud of, but it's part of the fun we had on the farm. I don't think there's any permanent damage, but we had a lot of fun with that. As I said, my brother and I played a lot of baseball. He used to nag me relentlessly to go play pitch and catch with him. I'd go hit flies to him or something. And we, oftentimes when my dad was in the field, like combining, and we were waiting for him to signal us to come over and help him unload the combine, we would play ball every opportunity we had. Well, his nagging me, oftentimes I wanted to do something else or just want to lie around the house or I wanted to watch TV. And he finally my mother would get so tired of hearing him nag me to go play ball and my saying no, that she would go out and play ball with him. And she was pretty athletic. I think she played softball in high school, played basketball certainly. Used to talk about her underhand shooting with basketball. But anyway, she'd go out and play baseball, play pitch and catch with him, and just kind of shame me into going out and playing also. But she was just a wonderful person that really had a great way about her. We really enjoyed her, my mother. Unfortunately, this idyllic life came to a fairly abrupt halt. A number of things happened. In 1955, my sister Eleanor graduated from high school at Johnstown and went off to Ohio State that fall. And she met Dudley Kramer, a young man who was, I think, in graduate school on to Wittenberg College, I know, and graduated there. And he's studying for a physical therapist degree of some kind at OSU. And he met my sister, and they decided to get married after her sophomore year in college. Well, my dad wasn't real happy that she wasn't going to finish college, but she was in love with Dudley and wanted to get married. So in September of 1957, they got married and left for Indianapolis to start their life, where Dudley had a job. Shortly before that, my mother had had an instance of cancer show up. I didn't know this at the time, but I know she had surgery, I think in 1950, well, it would have been 56, I think, and she had surgery. She came home and appeared to be doing well, but the cancer did come back. And in 1957, about the time of my sister's wedding, and it was turned out to be an incurable, inoperable cancer. And so she lived at the farmhouse. My dad and my Aunt Dorothy took care of her until her death on March 1st of 1958. It was a very sad time for us. My brother was a senior in high school, and I was a sophomore in high school. I was 16 the day after her, 2 days after her death, so I was pretty young. So we lost my sister by marriage, my mother to cancer. My brother went off to college then in the fall of '58. So my sister, my mother, my brother were basically gone in that short period of time. My dad and I lived alone, the two of us. He continued to farm, and I went off to school. Then I went to Johnstown High School the next 2 years. And then I went off to Ohio State the fall of 1960. My father met and married Lois Arlene Brown on his birthday, November 13th, 1960. And they started off my life on their own. They moved to Johnstown shortly after their marriage. Bought a house in Johnstown. Dad had taken a job at John Ashbrook's congressional office. And so he rented out his farms, I think. Maybe he still farmed. I think he rented his farmland out and started a career with Congressman Ashbrook's office. which he did for, I think, 2 years, probably, maybe 4. Um, but anyway, our family really broke up, left the farm. So I had 16 years on the farm growing up. It was a nice life by and large. Some tragedy with my mother. I know my dad said that farmhouse had some bittersweet memories for him because both his mother and his wife had passed away in that house. But he had happy years with his family there, so I guess there's some good things and bad things. Let me tell you a little about my parents. Let me tell you what my dad was like. I mentioned to you that he had a rather unhappy childhood, um, but he really appreciated his family. He loved his family. He loved spending time with his family. He was a quiet man, but yet he commanded a lot of respect in the community. He was well respected as being honest, charitably minded. He would do things for his neighbors when he felt they needed assistance. He didn't ask for any kind of acknowledgement for that. He was a very kind gentleman, very thoughtful. He's a strong American. He was a staunch conservative, believed in people's need to take responsibility for their actions. He served over 20 years on the Hartford Fair Board, which he thoroughly enjoyed. He spent every 2 weeks every summer getting ready for the fair and for the fair itself and cleaning up afterwards. As president of the fair board, we got pictures of him at various times at the fair. He really enjoyed it and did a great job with that. He was a lodge member, mostly in his earlier or younger life, but he did go to lodge even later in life. And he was one of the few lodge members who could memorize and did, in fact, memorize a good part of their programs so that when they had inspections or so forth, he was the one that they called upon to do the heavy lifting as far as doing a presentation. He was took great pride in being able to memorize things. He remembered things from his childhood when he was in school, long poems like Old Ironsides. He could recite the whole poem of Old Ironsides. He took a matter of pride upon himself, from himself to be able to do that. I have a recording, audio recording of his doing some of this famous memorization. He had a sales pitch he used to do for the Grange programs occasionally, and it was to take a washing machine. He could make milk out of the washing machine. He put in hay, and I got that all recorded. A very humorous kind of a thing he did. Out of character for him because he was a quiet man, but he really enjoyed memorizing and reciting long things. He was a handsome man. I remember women recently who would say, I remember your dad, he was such a handsome man. I never thought about him as being a handsome man, but he must have been. He was my dad, for heaven's sakes. You don't think about your dad as being handsome, you think about him as being an old man. I'm so sure my kids think that I look at this point. So it was interesting to hear that kind of a description about him. He had 3 sisters, as I mentioned. Doris was the oldest, then Helen, and then Leila. Doris and Helen were close to my brother, or to my dad, I think, more than Leila was. Leila was sort of a free spirit. She and Clyde smoked and drank alcohol, which was butt of a lot of jokes from my family. But we used to celebrate Christmas and Thanksgiving every year for a long time by getting together with my Aunt Helen, Uncle Austin, Uncle Shorty, Aunt Doris, Uncle Clyde, and Aunt Leila, and their families. We have pictures of those days. Those were fun times. At Thanksgiving time, it was usually warm enough that the cousins would go outside and play football or baseball or basketball. Sometimes it was too cold to do much, but we would go out and do that after big Thanksgiving dinner. Christmas time was usually too cold for that. We'd sit around and maybe play games, but we oftentimes would just kind of sit around and talk for a few hours. Interesting relationships with our cousins that unfortunately our children are too far removed from their cousins to have that kind of relationship. My dad was devastated by my mother's early death. He was in 2 years really of pretty deep depression. I remember he was very upset about that, and we felt that she had been given a bad hand. That wasn't fair that she had died so early, and that if she could have just held on a little while longer, or just this close to a cure for cancer, which it turned out was not true. Although we made tremendous strides in cancer treatment, at that time there wasn't too much you could do. Uh, but we've got better treatments now. But he was very devastated by that. He really didn't come out of it until he met and married Lois Brown, and that turned out to be a wonderful marriage for him. He's had people, I know he's said to people that he was fortunate that not only had he had one good marriage, he had two good marriages, and he thought that was wonderful. He and Lois traveled a good deal in their married life, and something my dad had never gotten to do because he didn't have any money before. But over the years, he was able to accumulate some assets and was able to do some traveling. Lois worked at the savings and loan in Johnstown. So they did have money to do a few things like that. He even bought a little home in Florida and used to go there in the wintertime, which he thought was pretty terrific that he could retire and spend his winters in Florida. He loved his grandchildren. Um, my sister had 3 children. They lived in Middletown at that time. Terry had 2 and I had 2. And he loved his grandchildren, loved to play and spend time with them. He loved horses. I suppose that goes back to the workhorse days. By the way, the 2 workhorses I remember were Nick and Bess, I believe. 2 black horses, and one had a white star on the head. He loved horse racing, he loved harness racing, not really the jockey racing, but harness racing, and would go to fairs around the community, and particularly the Little Brown Jug. He loved going to Delaware to the Little Brown Jug. One of the things he'd like to do in the summertime, when the weather was nice, after supper at night, when my mother would clean up the dishes, he would go out and sit on the front porch and sit in the swing and swing all night long. When my mother finished the dishes, she'd go out and together would sit on the porch all night long until it was time to go to bed. He just loved to do that. So interesting sideline about his life, that he really enjoyed the outdoors. He loved hunting, although he didn't do a lot of it, but he particularly liked going squirrel hunting, I think because he could go back in the woods and sit and just watch the world go by. He loved to loved the outdoors. He had no real hobbies, except I would say he enjoyed watching his sons play baseball, particularly Terry, who was very good at in basketball. And he hardly ever missed a game, and would love to follow and talk about the sporting events with his children. What do I remember about my mother? I'm going to say I was only 16 when she died, and she was ill the last year of her life, so I was pretty young to remember a whole lot about her, but I do have some impressions that she was indeed a wonderful person. She was a very pretty lady. She had very nice facial features. She was very active, a very active woman. She'd love to be playing ball with us or working in the fields with my dad. She was always, I don't think she ever took a nap. She was very energetic. I mentioned what a good cook and baker she was. An excellent mother. She was just a wonderful person. She loved her family. She loved to be with all of us when we were in school activities, taking us to school events or church events. I recall one time we first got a new car with automatic transmission, this 53 Ford, a blue Fairlane, light blue, robinate blue, kind of a Fairlane color. And she was taking me and a couple of my friends to a basketball game when we were in 7th grade, maybe. And she was talking to them as we're leaving the school, and all of a sudden she jammed on the brakes and threw us all in the front seat. And she had forgotten that this was an automatic drive car, and she shoved her left foot into what used to be the clutch, and she hit the brake instead. So she was quite mortified by that. We all got a big laugh about that, but she was just a wonderful person. She wore dresses almost all the time. I don't recall her ever wearing anything except dresses, even around the farm, even at work. Very light dresses in the summertime. So she was very feminine, but she was also a very athletic and strong person as well. She was very close to her sister, Dorothy Evans. They're not too different in age, and they apparently did a lot together when they were young. And they used to go to dances, two of them. And supposedly my mother was just an excellent dancer. And my dad used to tease her a great deal about being what a good dancer she was. And she went to Buckeye Lake a good deal for the big bands that we had down there, and went to the dances down there. So she was just a very active person. One of the things I remember about my childhood is going to Miller United Methodist Church, or at that time was a Miller Evangelical Church, which merged with the Methodist, became United Methodist Church. The church was over on Miller Road, I think it was. It's actually on 62 out of Johnstown heading towards New Malden. The church is still there. I think my grandparents went there. I think in one of the church windows, the stained glass windows, is a plaque that was put there when my grandfather made a contribution. I think that window is still there. In any event, that was a big part of our youth. Our youth growing up, we used to go to Sunday school there and church, and the Bible school in the summertime. And I remember at Christmas time, on the Sunday night before Christmas, there would be a children's program. And we were all as children, we were all supposed to have a little piece memorized to stand up in front of the group and recite this piece, and then we'd sing songs as children. And then at the end, Santa Claus would make an appearance and would give us all a Hershey's bar and an orange. Why, I don't know, but that seemed to be the tradition that we had there for years. So that was always fun. I remember the Christmas tree in the church being a huge Christmas tree, because it had the big ceiling, and with bubble lights on the tree. And I always remember that. When I see bubble lights today, I think about that Christmas tree. We went to church quite regularly, I would say every Sunday, but my dad tried to observe the Sabbath and very seldomly ever did any work on Sundays except for milking cows and feeding livestock, things he had to do. It was only when he got way behind, when the weather didn't cooperate, that he would go out in the fields and work, and that didn't look very good for the neighbors to drive by and see him working on a Sunday. So he didn't do that very often, and he would usually make some comment when he found somebody else working on Sunday. So he was a pretty true to his Christian religion. I don't know if he's particularly religious, but he observed the Sabbath. Some of the things we do on the farm you might find interesting. As I mentioned before, my brother used to play a lot of games, mostly baseball games. One game, as I mentioned, we were throwing tennis balls at each other, and he and I constantly were in disagreement about something. We were very competitive, even though he's bigger and stronger and 2 years older than I was. I was insisting I was every bit as good as he in any sporting event that we did. So we were very competitive, and we pitched balls to each other until we had 3 outs, and maybe a ground ball would be an out, or a fly ball over a certain distance would be a home run. I don't remember the details now, but we used to play those games. And he was much bigger and stronger, as I say, so he could hit the ball farther than I did. He oftentimes would hit it over the trees and across the road into the field across the road. And there might be corn in that field, or soybeans, or wheat. But the rule was, if you were the pitcher, you had to go retrieve the baseball or the tennis ball. So this became a perpetual battle, because I was the one that usually had to go chase them and go find the balls. And oftentimes I could not find the balls. We only had one ball. And I used to call back my brother to come out and help me find the ball. And he accused me always of intentionally not finding it. And this became a bone of contention that we'd yell back and forth. Come on out, I need your help. No, you know where it is, just reach over and pick it up. You're standing right next to it, I know you are. And reach over and pick it up. And I said, no, I can't find it. I knew that. I couldn't. We didn't sit. I walked back and forth. He said, it's over that way, over that way. So I'd go over that way and couldn't find it. I said, no, you're too deep. You're too whatever. So finally, in desperation, he would throw down the bat and walk the distance out to help me look for the ball. And it seemed like half the time, just as he got there, I'd find the ball. And so that would infuriate him even more because he just knew I was toying with him, that I knew all along where the ball was, and I just toying with him, and he'd get furious with me over that. And of course, that was not true, but he always accused me of that. But we had a lot of fun with that kind of ball anyway. As I say, he became a pretty good hitter, and I attribute much of that prowess to the fact that I pitched to him a great deal. We had up in the haymow, we had put together a board floor basketball court, which you wouldn't think up in the haymow you could do, but it was, it had board floor anyway. We just kind of swept it off and we put up a bank board, and maybe my dad helped us do that, and a rim and a net. And so we used to shoot basketballs up there, and once in a while we'd have friends come over and play basketball up in the barn. Then we put one on the ground floor, which wasn't as good in the playing surface because it was a gravel kind of a surface, or dirt surface, I should say. And there were a few holes here and there, so if you dribbled the ball and you hit one of the holes, it would shoot off to one side or the other. And it was not great for playing basketball, but it was bigger space, and we used to play that. I remember one Sunday we had people just drop in. One day we had probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 people show up, and we had quite a basketball game. Then in the wintertime, it was cold, probably in the 30s, but we would play basketball even in that kind of weather. We used to go ice skating in the wintertime. We had a pond back in the woods that my dad built. It was a long way back there, but and cold. But we used to go skating back there and play hockey with sticks and tin cans. Not a great deal, but it was a wintertime activity. In the summertime, when we had cousins come over, or well, my Uncle Vaughn's, my mother's brother Vaughn had 4 children, and when they'd come over, we'd play kick the can, maybe. And this was a game one person was it, and the idea was somebody else would kick the can, and while you're going to get the can and bring it back to a certain location, everybody would go hide, and then the person with the can had to guard the can, and he would then go out and look for people. And if I see a person, you run back the can, put one foot in the can, and say 1, 2, 3 on Janet, or 1, 2, 3 on Jimmy, and they were out of the game then, unless someone could come in while you were out looking and kick the can, and then everybody was free at that time. So that was always a fun game to play, and we never seemed to get mad when we'd lose. And you'll never lose the game until you had all people pick. It was a good game. We had ponies on the farm, and then my dad once came home and said that I bought you a pony. And we've always wanted a pony, I guess, but he brought this, it was a big day when he truck delivered this pony, a brown and white pony, named Sugar. And we loved that pony, used to ride it a good deal. Dad put a saddle on for us. And every spring, Sugar would have a colt. The first one was named Spice. It had a little black and white as well as brown on it. And then we had Cinnamon, and we had Taffy, and I forget the names, but every year for about 4 or 5 years we'd have a little colt, and Dad would feed the colt and sell it every year, and just get his money back from Sugar. That was a big occasion to have a new colt every spring. It was just a neat thing. What other games we played? We took tin cans and tied strings around through the cans and hang on to them. We put our feet on the cans and we'd walk like stilts around the yard. We'd make phones out of oatmeal containers by stretching a string between the 2 oatmeal cardboard containers, and you could actually hear the other voice on the other end, even though they're clear in the other room. We did all kinds of things in the wintertime to entertain yourselves, and that was one of the things we did. One of the things that Terry and I did when we were, I don't know, probably 8 and 10 years old, maybe less, because a neighbor gave us a runt pig that was going to die if we didn't take care of it. We took that pig and fed it out of a bottle until it was old enough to eat. The sows wouldn't take care of it, so we had to take care of it that way. And finally, the pig got big enough it could get on feed, and we raised that pig. Not really as a pet, but we know which one was Corky with a C, C-O-R-K-Y, and we loved that pig. Time came to send it to market, and my dad convinced us that that was what we had to do. We were reluctant to do that. This was really a pet. But somehow when he gave us a check for $40 in proceeds, it seemed okay to part with Corky. So I guess everything has a price. Talk a moment about how Marcia and I met and how we lived our married life. I mentioned that I graduated from high school at Johnstown in 1960 and went off to Ohio State and graduated in 1964 with a bachelor's degree in business. During the summer before my senior year, I had a job on campus as an orientation leader, which showing around new students around the campus. OSU is a big university. And I met Marcia. She was working in the orientation and testing office at the time. And so since I was picking up test results and taking them to various places for my students, we had some interaction along with other kids that she worked, other students she worked with. She was just starting her freshman year that fall, so she wasn't even in college at the time I met her in the summer of 1963. We were on our first date then that fall. And we dated my senior year, and it's pretty obvious that probably we were going to get married someday. But her parents insisted that she finish school before she'd do that, so I went off to, when I graduated, took a job in Akron at Goodyear for about 2 months, and then I went in the Army Reserves active duty, which I was required to do. We had a draft at that time, and to avoid the draft, I entered the Army Reserve for a 6-year reserve obligation. And upon return of from active duty in December of 1964, I went back to, I decided I didn't want to be an accountant at Goodyear. Went back to Ohio State to work on a master's degree, and I worked in the College of Business office. So that put me back in touch with Marcia. When she graduated in 1967, then we got married that August. And we lived in Westerville first year while I worked at the Edel Company, and she taught school at Westerville High School. Then I got restless and ended up getting a job at the Park National Bank. It's a long story, but essentially I decided I wanted to get into banking after all. I'd always wanted to be a banker and had the opportunity to do so. So I came to Park National Bank in March of 1968. We moved over here in June of 1968, moved to Smithfield Drive. As I mentioned, Jay was born in 1971 while we were on Smithfield, and Greg was born in 1973. And Marcia quit her teaching career when she was pregnant with Jay, and became a stay-at-home mom, which was great for me. I was pleased to see that. The kids both boys went to Miller Elementary, and to Roosevelt Junior High School, and then to Newark High School. And then Jay went off to Notre Dame when he graduated in 1990, and Greg went off to Notre Dame in 1992. So I think we kind of know the rest of the history from there. Hi, this is now June 9th, 2008, and I wanted to describe a little more of my family history. This time on my mother's side, Lindsay Chestor Barnhart was my mother. She married my father, Wayne Parsons, in May of 1936. She was born in September of 1914. Not sure where. I assume in a farmhouse, but I don't know. Her parents were out, Afton Barnhart, and her mother was Ada James Barnhart, who was the only grandparent I knew. The other three were deceased by the time I was born. But I remember my Ada James Barnhart, my grandmother, very well. She died, I think, in 1956. and she was 68 years old, as I remember. She was a pleasant, jolly lady, and I enjoyed visiting with her. She was always very fond of her grandchildren. Just a neat lady. Um, my mother went to New Albany schools. She grew up on a farm between New Albany and Johnstown. She had an older brother, Vaughn Barnhart, and a younger sister named Dorothy Barnhart, who married Stanley Evans. She's very close to her family and had a happy childhood as far as I can remember and determine. She went to New Albany High School where she played basketball and was very active in school affairs, I think. She was an excellent student. I think she graduated #1 in her class. When she was in grade school, she was able to skip one grade, so she graduated early in 1931 from New Albany High School. And she went to work for I think a fireworks manufacturer. I'm not sure the name of it, in Westerville. And I'm not sure where she met my father, but she met him, and they dated and married in May.